When you're fed up with fighting food and your body, join us here. I'm Allie Shapiro, creator of the Truce with Food program and your host for Insatiable, where we explore the hidden aspects of fighting our food, our weight, and our bodies, and dive deep into nutrition science and true whole health. Fair warning, this is not your parents' health care. This is a big rebel yell to those who crave meaning, hunger for truth, and whose lust for life is truly insatiable. Believe me, freedom awaits.
Have you ever had a colleague, family member, or friend who smoked and was agitated close to their smoke break, or if they otherwise couldn't grab a cigarette? Or you may know someone who struggles with alcohol and has trouble resisting a or many drinks. Perhaps you have similar feelings, but they are directed towards cookies, chips, or other kind of carbs. We haven't labeled the staples of the American diet as an addictive substance for many reasons. On one hand, our agricultural policy and food production that revolves genetically altered crops that produce cheap carbohydrates represents a bigger lobby and more electoral votes than tobacco, whose powerful lobby allowed cigarettes to be marketed as a healthy way to relax and safe for years, including by doctors, despite widespread evidence to the contrary. In addition to not being regulated, the sugar industry gets an estimated $4 billion in annual subsidies, courtesy of U.S. taxpayers. On the other hand, lobbies and food politics aside, food addiction and consequences require a more nuanced approach than abstinence as is possible for cigarettes and alcohol. We die if we avoid food completely, and food is much more fundamentally woven into our culture and earliest memories than alcohol or cigarettes, which in all cultures are generally adulthood indulgences. Do you remember summers at the pool with Swedish fish, or warm, salty, soft pretzels from the snack shack, or holidays with grandma's amazing mac and cheese, or dad's famous mashed potatoes? Or, like me, Friday night Pizza Huts where you cashed in your book it reward for reading 5 books to a free personal pan pizza. Chances are, if you scan your memory, some of your best, warmest memories involve sugar, associating this ingredient with pleasure, celebration, ritual, and reward. And for the purposes of this season, by sugar, I mean what we think of as traditional sugar, like sodas, candies, cakes, and added sugar in processed foods, like salad dressing, breads, pretzels, and other salty carbs. On the flip side, your most difficult memories probably also involve sugar as a source of refuge. If, like me, after another day of being bullied and isolated from, quote, the cool kids at school, you found bagels in the fridge to eat and numb the pain of being othered. Or right before a spinal tap to see how far your cancer had spread, your parents took you to the pancake house to try and bring some sort of comfort during the scariest health scare you've ever had. And who can forget Snackwell's, a dieter's low-fat bonanza where we thought we could eat the whole box because it was low-fat, not realizing that all the sugar was making us hungrier and hungrier. Sugar has comforted most of us when we were isolated in the midst of chaos, or for many of my clients, it was a lift when being emotionally neglected. Food companies methodically and relentlessly advertise to make us trust sugar and let these processed foods into our lives in a way not only without a warning label like cigarettes, but actually in a way we now come to seek out. As a result, what was once only used in a way that we use spices today, a little dab will do ya, is now the staple of our collective diets. And while now it's recommended to limit sugar, food companies didn't create but can capitalize on our Puritan, Christian, and capitalistic narrative of sacrifice equals reward, to ignore the mind-body connection and the need for emotional intelligence and agility. Adding insult to injury, we as taxpayers are paying to make ourselves and the environment, which is degraded immensely with our monoculture agriculture focused on sugar, corn, soy, and wheat that will be processed into sugar, unwell. We're subsidizing ecological collapse and the resulting pandemics like coronavirus. The decline of our personal and environmental bodies has led to an overtaxed healthcare system that was never designed for the chronic diseases, which in large part driven by our food supply and its consequences. In this season 11 of Insatiable, we will look at how we as individuals and a collective can go to sugar rehab, physically and emotionally. We will explore how we arrived here, root causes of sugar addiction, if sugar is really addictive, and can we eat it moderately, and how we can move forward with sugar in its proper pace in our life, and what does that look like for you? Without further ado, let's enter sugar rehab together. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 11, Episode 4, How to Stop I Deserve This Eating. And welcome, everyone. It's Allie. Obviously, today is going to be a solo episode. I deserve this emotional reasons we turn to sugar. In the emotional eating world, we often hear we use food to numb our feelings, and this is true. And my entire season 10 of Insatiable is about how sugar and really all foods become a way to create a safety refuge from unresolved trauma and how to turn this pain and discomfort from food into post-traumatic growth. And there's also a need for pleasure in our lives, right? Today, I'm going to focus on the pleasure of feeling like what we are doing is rewarding instead of just stressful. So when we don't feel we are being rewarded or rewarded enough with our daily and life choices, we turn elsewhere to reward ourselves. For some, this is alcohol, drugs, shopping, or gambling. And for many, it's food. And sometimes we do more than one. So today we're going to get to the root cause of this and ideas to practice and experiment with to end I deserve this eating. So to do this, I'm going to bring in adult development theory, which is critical to ending the root emotional reasons we battle with sugar. And I'll walk you through why and how. Now, you might be thinking, adult development theory and sugar? You are crazy, Allie. And you know what? You may be right. Who is to say anymore? I don't feel like I've been feeling like we're in the upside down, but now I don't know if upside down is right side up, whatever. We're in crazy times. However, today I will illustrate why integrating adult development theory into our disordered eating, with sugar being the pain point we will focus on today, is truly integrative medicine from my perspective. And what is actually crazy is that this understanding of how adults change is not integrated into most health and wellness behavior or habit change. The adult development theory I will walk you through on a very high level today is immunity to change. It was created by Dr. Robert Keegan and Dr. Lisa Leahy out of Harvard School of Adult Education. It is a brilliant, elegant theory that shows how adults can develop with meaningful challenges. A side note, a lot of you have asked me for book recommendations on adult development theory, and I love that you want to explore it. And a lot of what I recommended, and what's true is a lot of adult development theory is very academic and inaccessible. So only if you are someone who is obsessed with the change process and how adults learn is it really fun to dig into, right? And in my opinion, it isn't applied to health and wellness as much as it needs to be. So I'm going to be doing some very accessible virtual workshops on stories and beliefs that we have that make us turn to food this summer and fall, applying adult development theory. So if you're interested in that and really understanding adult development theory and how it applies to health and wellness and food, get on my list at allieshapiro.com. Okay, now back to immunity to change, adult development theory. In this framework, there are 3 adult development plateaus. We have the socialized mind, which we call the good girl mind in my work, the self-authoring mind, which we call the boss mindset in my work, and the self-transforming mind. And we really don't touch that, and I'll show you why. The socialized mind is where we start as adults. Now, all of us, regardless of our phase of development, need belonging, right? We've talked a lot about in season 10, we have an entire nervous system, branch of our nervous system dedicated to if we belong, then it's that important. Being with other humans is not only fun and makes us feel part of something larger than ourselves, we also know on this metaphorical level that it's healthy for the gut microbiome. It boosts our immunity when we're around different people. The same way that different foods are the best path to a diverse gut microbiome, being around different people gets us exposed to a variety of bacteria. And we also need it from an emotional standpoint and a soul standpoint. However, when we are in a socialized mindset, we are seeking belonging based on how we've been socialized to believe we need to be to maintain that belonging. So this socialization occurs from family norms, right? But our family norms come from church norms, media norms, and medical norms, and popular culture, which includes diet culture. I think of the backlash people I know who have gotten for no longer being vegan, right? Or speaking out on the nuances of vaccines. Food and health is as tribal and polarized these days as political parties because of the general adult development stage most of us are in. So even if you identify as a rebel, at this stage of adult development, your rebelliousness is often defined against the mainstream. So it's still controlling and shaping how we identify as a rebel in this socialized mind. You can see this in splinters of the body acceptance movement, where there seems to be antagonism against any form of weight loss as part of the patriarchal. People are mad at Adele right now for losing weight. So we are still commenting on women's bodies and choices when we do this, right? Let Adele be. That's my opinion. And this is why no matter how rebellious you feel, weight loss can still feel so important because we've been conditioned to believe so many stories about what will happen when we are thin, even if we are reacting against it. Now, applying the socialized mind to sugar and processed foods, even the idea that processed foods are relatively safe is part of this socialization, right? As I talked about with Charles Eisenstein in episode 1 of this season, there is the story of assumed progress and trust authority. Trusting that ingesting copious amounts of sugar was safe in the first place wasn't a big deal, legitimized by their place on the shelf, slick advertising, and his assumption that someone would have stopped their sale if this was unsafe. I think we can understand, if we look at the history of the corporate capitalization of medicine, we see how doctors used to endorse smoking. And we're like, that was crazy. But what are they endorsing now, the American Medical Association, that we will look back and think is crazy, right? When we're stepping out of a socialized mind, we start to question these things. If you get my Well-Rounded newsletter, I've talked a lot about the hundreds of $millions I've spent on marketing Pop-Tarts or Pepsi alone to make us feel they are safe, because it really goes against our intuition if we aren't in a socialized mind. It's also why no one bats an eyelash at giving pregnant women basically a 24-ounce soda while they are pregnant to test if they have gestational diabetes. And then these bigger cultural stories get filtered into our individual families and communities. So for example, in my life, sugar was used as a reward by my family, my school district, and my community at large. When I was afraid to jump off the diving board at swimming lessons, my dad was on the side and told me, Allie, you do this? Because I was walking to the edge and my little knees were shaking, and that thump, thump, thump. And he said, we'll go to Dunkin' Donuts if you jump, right? I ran and I cannonballed and I held my breath. And so this is one example of probably thousands where I was taught to be rewarded for doing something hard. Our school district participated in Book It, which if we read 5 books, we would get a free personal pan pizza from Pizza Hut. And again, rewarded for doing something rather than, hey, how do we cultivate a love of reading and learning, right? But it's like, no, you do this so you can get pizza. And that's where maybe many of us learn to just check the box. Rather than saying, what books would be interesting? I probably picked the shortest, knowing I was probably trying to hack some efficiency. Or I played softball, and after each game, someone would bring a snack and soda. So we were rewarded for playing the game we loved. I was socialized into food equals reward for being active, even though, let's be real, softball is not that active of a sport. I love it, but it wasn't the cross country team. So in a death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of way, sugar came to be associated with reward, which is why when I was binging and emotionally eating, I would tell myself, I deserve this. The next adult development plateau is the self-authoring mind. About 33% of college-educated American adults will arrive here, and about 40% of entrepreneurs. And this is where, from a health, wellness, and body perspective, you learn your body and how to choose what works for you. You are self-authoring your body's story. And working with my clients, they learn how to choose what works for them by becoming aware of the choices we are making that we don't know we're making. We are often making choices we don't know we're making because we don't know the stories that we've been socialized into, and everyone else is doing it, right? It's like a fish trying to see it's in water. And so there are blind spots to what we can choose. In the case of processed foods or sugar, maybe we never thought to question that a grocery store mostly doesn't even contain real food anymore. Or we never thought to question that there's a story of sacrifice equals reward we are following, which shows up as staying in jobs we don't love for a great retirement, or for men having to be a good provider even if they don't want to be so career focused, or women believing we will get celebrated for sacrificing our lives for our families. Becoming self-authoring is not about how smart you are. It's about how curious and willing to become self-aware of the stories controlling you, working to rewrite the story you want to live. This is where you really have to question the authorities in your life, whether they are the nutrition expert, doctor, or family of origin patterns, and including food norms, and decide, does this work for me? Is this my truth? What are my other choices? So when it comes to sugar or processed foods, self-authoring looks like, how does what I'm eating affect my blood sugar? And how do I connect that to my anxiety versus I'm being good ordering the egg whites? In this example, many of us have been socialized to believe doctors and a standardized approach to medicine, which comes out of a story of capitalism and scale. Even though high cholesterol doesn't come from healthy fats, if you don't know Big Pharma's influence on educating the medical community and how they targeted cholesterol as a problem, because we're one of the only countries that still test it. I know other countries like the UK and Sweden, last time I had studied them, weren't tracking tracking it, and Big Pharma lobbied to have the definition of high cholesterol lowered from 220 to 200. And so even though maybe we are told we are pre-diabetic, we are terrified of fat and have no idea that healthy fats are healthy for you. And so people continue to eat egg whites, which drives up sugar cravings and high insulin, which is what happens with metabolic syndrome, which is way more dangerous than cholesterol. And often high cholesterol goes with metabolic syndrome, but it's the root cause is too much sugar, usually not healthy fats. So this is one example of 1,000. Or here's another shift: we become more self-authoring. What's happening emotionally when I overeat pizza versus I deserve pizza tonight? As we become self-authoring and discover what's true for us food-wise, you will come to look at your own body and food more holistically and understand how your stories and patterns come to affect I deserve this. As you become more self-authoring, you get information and results you wouldn't otherwise have access to. So for example, some of my clients discovered their birth control was making them more insulin resistant and thus crave sugar more, yet they were put on it from doctors who were socialized into Western medicine that the pill can be used for unexplained period problems. Or for others, it was realizing their PMS cravings were from deregulated blood sugar, not something that was normal. And others have realized that when they partake in sugary holiday traditions that connect them with their family, they digest them better and can be moderate versus always thinking sugar is just bad. Becoming self-authoring is learning to discern what works for you and trusting your body's feedback and real lived experiences versus what you've been told by an outside authority. And again, it doesn't mean that you don't bring in outside authorities to help you, but ultimately you're taking their information not as the answer, but data for you. So becoming self-authoring is really challenging. It takes a couple of years to really rewrite your body story, although it can take anywhere from 6 to 12 months to stop turning to food once you decide to self-author how you react to stress, including the I deserve this pattern being one of these patterns. So what usually happens with my clients is they come in wanting peace with food, a truce with food. They don't want the pain of binging and overeating anymore, and they do care about weight loss. And I always say, we'll hold that. That may not be our direct focus, but after about 6 to 12 months, the weight loss isn't the center, and they start to value their health because they realize that they're getting the results by focusing on different things. That time frame in terms of like actually having peace with food doesn't necessarily have to be a couple of years. I want to make sure that is clear. But really becoming self-authoring and owning your body story can take time. So I was telling up a couple of clients about this episode, and they are very rebellious, very accomplished, and have always felt different from mainstream. And they all said, I would have thought I was self-authoring before working with you, but I wasn't. And so I just want to bring that up because it's just not the default in our culture. So for example, I used to think my choices were which antidepressant do I want to choose versus, wow, maybe I don't have a genetic destiny of depression or a serotonin deficiency. I have a choice to heal my depression through food and owning the story that made me so depressed in the first place. And this is one example of hundreds in my own life, because remember, I've been working on being self-authoring with my body for about 12 years now, that I've been able to make radically different choices simply by knowing what choices are available to me. Overcoming my infertility diagnosis might be the crown jewel of self-authoring health experiences, although it wouldn't have been possible without the previous ones, including ending my binging. Working on the story that caused my binging enabled me to get off so many meds and heal my body. The naturopath and acupuncturist who helped me get pregnant were really tweaking the foundation I built by recognizing, owning, and healing the body story that was causing my binging. Each self-authoring win sets you up for more self-trust and the success as you tune in more acutely to what is true for your body. This doesn't mean things get easier, but as my friend Laura McGowan says, we get better. I want to emphasize that what's worked for me is not what will work for others. In my work with clients, I'm always guiding clients to what is true for them. I also want to be clear. Becoming self-authoring doesn't mean natural medicine or no medicine is the answer, or you can control the outcomes. I didn't know if natural medicine would work for my fertility, and I still think there's some element of the great mystery that I'll never know regarding how I did get pregnant. It just means you are aware of the full range of your choices and how to be discerning to navigate those choices and increase the odds of getting the results that you want. And that might mean natural medicine is a choice, but so is Western medicine, and you may need a combination of both. This is why self-authoring is so powerful and challenging. You will have to open yourself up to the stories that you've been living by aren't always true, and to deal with more complexity than simple black and white, all or nothing ways of being. I share this because this whole COVID situation has made me see how critical it is to be self-authoring in your health going forward. It's what I'm most passionate about. And I know we can get many more of us to be self-authoring. If we can increase that 33%, that means we have many more people who know their own power. And candidly, maybe this is an unpopular opinion, but I think the body is one of the last doors that feminism has to walk through, because I still see a lot of ways that even though certain feminist platforms seem progressive, and they are, and we need to see choices, there's also still some socialized mind about what it means to have power in your body. I think the body is the last frontier we need to really own and explore in feminism. Okay, so finally, the last adult development plateau is self-transforming. And it's worth noting, but it's kind of a 1% thing, although a different 1% than we are used to thinking about in terms of wealth and power. Only about 1% of the population arrives here. In a nutshell, this is where you allow yourself to be transformed by the very views and ideas that probably repulse you or that you judge very much after you become self-authoring. So for me, I grew up, my mom definitely liked natural stuff, but we were still very much a Western medicine family. I mean, my dad still is, my mom is not. They haven't shifted that way, but I was very much more Western medicine. And of course, my experience with using chemo and radiation with my cancer really made me see the amazing power that Western medicine can offer us. But now that I've self-authored, I tend to be a less intervention, more natural approach to things. If I were to become self-transforming, I really need to be open to Bill Gates's GMO vaccine geoengineering agenda. Again, the mainstream media calls it geoengineering. People who are called conspiracy theorists calls it chemtrails. It's the same thing. It just depends on what media you're reading. But I'd have to be really open to his approach for building health, even though it rests on controlling and ignoring nature's wisdom. It's not root cause resolution, which is its antithesis to everything that my self-authoring journey has proven to me. And it feels like blasphemy. But if I were to become self-transforming, I'd have to really get into all of that and see the merits of maybe some elements of truth. It doesn't mean I completely switch. It just means I'm open to elements. So after this overview of the step, let's go back in detail to the socialized mind and some beginning self-authoring steps out of this with the I deserve this reasons we turn to sugar. One of the root causes of this pattern is the story we've been socialized into of sacrifice equals reward. Here in America, we've been socialized into the puritanical work ethic. Sacrifice and you will be rewarded in heaven was the original idea. Discipline leads to the good things, right? And this is why we assume thin people are disciplined and a thread in fat phobia, that heavier people are lazy and self-indulgent. Outside of food, this story often translates into feeling guilty if we aren't productive, feeling a badge of honor for being busy and exhausted. This story, whether we are conscious of it or not, is what creates a lot of how we feel about ourselves. And around much of the Western world, we've been influenced by Christianity, even if you aren't Christian. There's a story that America is about separation of church and state, but our legal system does not actually reflect this. But I don't want to focus just on Christianity, because most religions are patriarchal and throw women under the bus. And so as women, we've been socialized into believing that how we get recognition is being a martyr. The more we sacrifice, the more recognition. I was watching Mother's Day's post. It was my first Mother's Day with Essa outside the womb. And I saw a couple that was like, she sacrifices so much for our family. And I was like, you know what? Carlos is never going to say that about me. I mean, I do a lot, but I'm not sacrificing myself for our family. And I'm not to say that there's a right or wrong or that it's black and white, right? But I don't feel put upon because we divide the labor because of how we also divide our finances. So that's not to say, I'll get into more of that in a second, because it's not to say that women don't do more. But I don't think that that will ever be something that Carlos will post about me. And I'm okay with that, because in my self-authoring state, that's not something that will work for me because I get resentful very easily. I'm a Libra. I like justice. I like balance. And so even if it's not about our families, who isn't afraid of being called high maintenance or difficult? So maybe I feel very confident in my relationship with Carlos and how I show up as a mom, but in other areas, I do not want to be called difficult. So sometimes even having basic needs as a woman can be viewed as these labels, right? We are often given these very unfairly. And yet when it comes to becoming self-authoring, we get to decide what having needs means about us. I'm going to decide that resting does not mean that I'm lazy and unproductive. And then if we filter this puritanical, patriarchal religion story through capitalism, men are pressured to think they are only worthwhile based on being a provider and to, quote, man up when they are having feelings. And that leads to deserving their unhealthy food or alcohol. Capitalism also means, based on if you grew up economically lower or middle class, there was this story that has been particularly disproven by economists and sociologists in the post-Reagan economic era of upward mobility. In other words, after Reagan's era, what he did and what Congress did, upward mobility in the US stopped as a whole, as a general trend. Of course, there's always exceptions, and that's what the media tends to highlight because America loves to tell its own stories about itself. We, as a whole, aren't a very self-aware country. And so if you worked hard and sacrificed, you'd be rewarded with more money and the accompanying social services security like better schools, better clothes, et cetera, that comes with that upward mobility. And this is also why diet culture can convince us that the more we restrict ourselves, the more weight loss we should have. The harder the workout, the bigger the calorie burn, and thus the bigger the weight loss reward, right? These are just a few translations of the sacrifice reward story. To start to become self-authoring, we need to ask ourselves, could there be other ways to live? Is this the story I want to live? Is this working for me? So we're going to get back, and we're going to take a quick break from our sponsor, and then we're going to come back with how to self-author ourselves out of this story if we want to explore that this doesn't have to be true for us. Are you ready to take action from this insatiable season and experience what it's like to be free of sugar cravings? Enter Freedom from Cravings, a 5-week live group coaching program that starts right after Memorial Day. If you've ever wondered why you can eat healthfully but still have a 3 p.m. crash that sends you, even more frequently in our quarantine times, to your cabinet for chips or peanut M&Ms, or why you can be good all day and then overeat popcorn or coconut ice cream while watching Netflix at night, Sugar Rehab will show you how sugar cravings are a biology game, not a willpower or discipline game. Generic advice from magazines or nutrition experts doesn't take into account your unique biology and history. You need to learn where you fall on the vegetarian, Mediterranean, paleo continuum to learn what healthy and good foods are for you. This will help to prevent sugar cravings. No white knuckling required. Rehab programs for other forms of substance abuse focus first on the detox portion to free the body from chemical dependency before delving into the emotional and spiritual reasons for addiction. Likewise, in Freedom from Cravings, we'll focus on the physical and chemical dependency elements of food to clear the way for subsequent work and focus on the deeper-seated issues that may make you turn to food. I'll be personally guiding you through experiences and experiments to determine what your biology needs are to not only prevent sugar cravings all day and at night, but to also feel satiated, focused, optimistic, and energized. Be prepared to be surprised and redefine what healthy means for you and your body. Registration for Freedom from Cravings runs May 18th through May 25th. Save $50 if you register by May 22nd. Enter coupon code EARLYBIRD to save $50. Sign up at alishapiro.com to get on my list so you don't miss out on the early bird savings or this live program that I only will run once this year. Okay, so we are back. Before the break, I said if we want to start to become self-authoring, we need to ask ourselves, could there be other ways to live besides the sacrifice reward story? Is this the story I want to live? Is this working for me? What I found for myself and my clients, that the more we feel rewarded about what we are doing during our day, the less we turn to food. When we are consciously choosing how to respond to an email or move our bodies or show up with clients or considering our own needs and what's on our schedule that day, we start to enjoy the day or the process of our goals and the end results more. Kind of the same way, like you can't hate yourself into a loving relationship with your body. The more you love your body, the more enjoyable, and then you get better results because of the sustainability. The longer you show up doing these habits, right, the more the results. So to stop the I deserve this eating, we probably need to shift from a sacrifice reward story to how do I make this process rewarding, not just the end result. Also, side note, this does not mean life is easy. We often project life being easier onto weight loss, and I'm talking more about having more ease if we define ease as choosing more of what we find meaningful. For example, when it comes to my career, my corporate job was much easier than running my own company. And granted, I left 13 years ago and wasn't in a high-pressure leadership role. But I worked a lot less hours in corporate. I had the security of a paycheck at the time, benefits, and I had more vacation than I do now. But I felt busy bored, as one of my clients just described her own feelings about her job. Thank you for that. I'll just call her Jay. And yet there's more ease in my life because in becoming self-authoring with my career, what I identified as rewarding to me is making an impact in women's health, being intellectually challenged, having flexibility, and the freedom to call the creative shots. So even though there are many days where I'm more exhausted from working for myself, I don't turn to food because it's a good kind of exhaustion. I have less vacation, and yet I don't need vacation the way I needed them in the corporate life, because what I find fun and interesting, I get to experience on most days. So the stress from being my own boss, even with COVID, being a small business owner, feels like it's worth it. So the more we have choices, the more that feel worth it than blah, the less we have I deserve this eating. Now, I want you to notice any irritation, judgment, or buts that come when I suggest you could be making more rewarding choices. In Truce with Food and Why Am I Eating This Now, we say the quote that Gloria Steinem and Aaron Brockovich made famous: "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." And if I would have heard this podcast from someone else than myself, someone say this to me years ago, I would have rolled my eyes and found all the reasons it was easier for someone else to have more rewarding choices in areas of food, exercise, and even building a business. And quite frankly, there are many people facing more challenges than me because of the white, heterosexual, and middle class privilege I was born into. And thus, were achieving certain things are impossible or an extreme personal cost for others because of their race, their sexuality, or their social economic status. So we always have to look at our privilege and filter that through the range of choices we have. For me, though, where I was at in my life, it was, when I was struggling with weight loss, well, their metabolism is faster. They can eat that stuff and get away with it. But those people have family money, and so they can slow down and not be burned out, which is often how I felt my early days of building my business. All these things are true. And yet I can see how I was making food, exercise, and building a business a lot harder and exhausting than it had to be. I was not at all rewarding for myself because I believed you needed to sacrifice, push through cravings, work out hard, even when you don't want to, keep your nose to the grindstone, and isolate yourself while building a business. The irritation, judgment, or buts that come from this idea that sugar or any area of our life could be more rewarding is most likely your protective resistance. For those of you who have been rewarded for working hard and sacrificing a lot, whether that's through gold stars or rescuing or fixing other people, we judge others or ideas of more rewarding choices because we've disowned the parts in ourselves that are allowed to rest, that can say no, that can ask for what we need, even if it might rock the boat. So how do we make life more rewarding? First of all, this is a practice. It's not like a 1, 2, 3 steps. And it's not something you do and you're done. Plus, there's always more layers. I recently found a new story in my own life that is making me work harder than it needs to be. To begin, think of an area of your life, whether it be exercise, work, parenting, or a specific relationship you'd like to be more rewarding. Also, this is a total plug for the transcripts. I pay to have the transcripts done because I know we learn in different ways, and some people don't listen to audios. But if you want to go back and really use these journal questions and you're in the car or whatnot, go to alieshapiro.com/podcast, and there's the transcript. I will use exercise as an example to take you through this reflective exercise because it's a big reason we think we deserve food, especially because research shows when we view exercise as a sacrifice or a punishment, we overestimate how many calories we burn exercising and underestimate how much we eat for our sacrificial exercise. So to begin self-authoring ourselves out of this story, we first have to define what is rewarding for us. Our socialized story tells us the reward is the recognition based on the sacrificial identity we've been recognized for, whether it's hardworking, puts her family first, great at handling stress. It will all depend not only on the bigger cultural myths, but how these cultural myths did or did not get filtered into your family of origin. So I want you to start thinking about the area of your life you chose and maybe the next choice you have in that area. So for example, with exercise, think about the next time you plan to exercise. You want to reflect on what would make this choice feel rewarding or worthwhile to me? What would enable me to enjoy the process of X rather than just the end result? And it's also okay if you don't know. Self-authoring is a process of self-discover, recognizing there's so much more to us than we knew, our own power included. Once you identify what is meaningful to you, you should identify the stress response that makes you see this choice as stressful, not rewarding. Our stress response usually makes us defensive and generates reasons the new choice can't be rewarding. This is known as protective resistance. We generate protective resistance because we are afraid of judgment, criticism, conflict, rejection, and or failure to uphold the identities we like about ourselves, like good mom or hardworking or not difficult. So in other words, if we were to pick a more rewarding choice, we might think that makes us difficult. And so we'll find all the reasons that we can't do that. The protective resistance is generated based on our stress responses of compete, avoid, or accommodate. And if you aren't familiar with these responses, take my quiz at alishapiro.com/comfort-eating-quiz to learn your predominant style and more about each response as we use all three. I'll also link to it in the show notes here. So for example, if you find yourself in the competitor mode, what often makes us unable to view or see rewarding choices is the timeline that we've given ourselves. When we go into compete mode, our big fear is we will miss out on what the success or winning will bring. And we need to get there fast because there is a scarcity of success and winning. The big fear is it's never going to happen, and getting there as fast as possible lessens the anxiety of the opportunity drying up and or not happening. For example, many of us go into compete mode if we have a wedding or a high school reunion come up. This gives us an insane deadline to lose 20 pounds. We cut out a bunch of foods, sacrifice any pleasure in the process because we feel behind, especially if the scale's not moving. And that's how the competitor frames the process, right? It's why when we can be panicked around weight loss because there's only so many romantic partners and I'm not getting any younger, or this would be easier if I were thinner. When we are competing, we have such high standards for ourselves because we believe the sacrifice reward story rather than getting results can be a relaxing and creative challenge. It's about ease, not being easy. I think anything worthwhile in life is going to take a little grit, but it also takes devotion more than discipline. So if you enjoy the process, you want to keep, it's worth the challenge. So if we apply this to an exercise example, we deserve these fries because of the punishment of the super hard workout that we think will fast track weight loss or body toning. Many clients realize the sacrifice reward story applied to exercise leads to sugar cravings because hard workouts make them exhausted and their body more stressed. So not only is there an emotional need for reward, but a physiological need too. When they tune into what will replenish me, they get more tuned into their menstrual cycles or life phases and align with their body, and moving their body becomes rewarding because of what ways it makes their life more rewarding, such as having more energy, feeling more creative. So if part of you says, I deserve this food, is from the competitor's view of the situation, and you like to experiment with new choices, I invite you to journal on this question. What would shift and how I approach X, right, in the area of your life, the next choice, if I chose what would replenish me to generate those new choices? We can still have standards and learn to enjoy the process. Providing rewards along the way will support us in going the distance to our big goals. Our next stress response is avoid. Do you find you're making life harder by avoiding and eating to procrastinate? And your reaction to avoiding is doing everything at the last minute, totally stressed, and then needing sugar because you deserve it after the extreme effort expended. Understand that this stress is usually a result of the idea that there is a perfect choice, a definitive right or wrong, and the stress to execute or choose perfectly. We often avoid because the stakes feel so make or break, right or wrong. Often what we feel is overwhelm or not wanting to get started as a result of such high stressful stakes, which is where procrastination comes in. And often productivity hacks don't work because it's not about productivity. We often avoid because we have the idea that there will be dramatic failure or instant success, which adds the pressure that makes us avoid. In reality, we need to go from supersizing our expectations and effort to right-sizing our expectations and choices. For example, I was working with a client who was going to see a new endocrinologist, and she had avoid tendencies. In our session, I asked her what she wanted to get out of this appointment with the doctor. And she was avoiding figuring it out because she felt overwhelmed. When I helped her see that the endocrinologist appointment wasn't going to magically give her a solution, but rather more data for her to make the right choices for her, it reduced the pressure of the appointment. She could approach it more as an interview to see if this doctor was the right fit, not that the doctor had some magical powers to have all the answers and that she had to listen to, right? And get to like her. And then it became easier to get organized for the appointment because the pressure of this being her one shot wasn't there. If we apply the sacrifice reward story to exercise with the avoid response, we often avoid because we aren't enjoying what we are doing because we believe we need to, quote, gear up to do the exercise plans. Make it a thing by going to a gym or a boutique workout place with the right clothes and spend all the money and driving there. And don't get me wrong, I love some of those workouts sometimes if I have the capacity for those. Mainly today, meaning a babysitter, meaning my mom, since we're in COVID times. But there's a lot of work, but that just involves a lot of work to just work out. And if that's enjoyable, great. If not, you don't need to sacrifice or do all that work to move your body. With quarantine, many of us find our workout places have closed, and many are discovering, wow, I can work out from home. For some people, that makes it easier. Others don't love it. And I hear that. I like a mix of the two. Or walking in nature is so easy. The more you right-size exercise or integrate it into your life versus it being a thing requiring so much gearing up or work, the more rewarding it becomes simply because it's easier at the very least. At best, you will find your own inspiration for moving your body as you do it more consistently and understand the immediate rewards of it, like more energy, better sleep, rather than what you've been socialized to measure, which is calories or how hard or how much you sweated or lately how expensive it was, right? So if you find that part of your I deserve this food is from the avoid view of the world being so much sacrificial work, I invite you to journal on this question. How can I right-size my expectations of what I have to do, what's coming up, and the next step? Even in creating this podcast episode, I right-sized it from all the stories I know cause us to turn to sugar to one, the I deserve this story. This is better for you as a listener, so you don't get overwhelmed, and better for me, who is really struggling with sleep these past couple of weeks. Essa, my baby boy, is sleeping better than I am. He's also had a little bit of sleep regression, so together, we won't go into that. This is not a podcast on sleep. But I can teach you the others in my upcoming workshops or another podcast season. It's not going to make or break the value of this episode, right? If anything, it will probably be less to take in and thus easier to integrate, more rewarding for all. And so finally, we have the accommodator response. Accommodators are people-pleasing and or fix-it mode at the expense of our own needs. Here, we don't even consider our needs, putting everyone and everything first to protect that identity that requires us to sacrifice getting our needs met. It might be how we view a good mom or a low-maintenance friend or not a difficult coworker. Being a new mom, I think about how this accommodator and sacrificial story comes together in heterosexual parenting. Good parents sacrifice for their children, right? Men sacrifice with the pressure to provide and make their wives happy. And many modern dads want to be very involved in child rearing too. And these pressures come together. The modern phenomenon of the dad bod is a result of using sugar, often in the form of alcohol and, processed foods, when the pressures feel too much or they can't fix their wife's happiness because it's an inside job for all of us. Although it's an inside individualistic job, we also need to be in community, right? So part of patriarchy, racism is this idea that we exalt the individual over the collective. So let's be clear about that. When I say it's an inside job, we have to find the communities where we belong, our authentic selves. So perhaps a relic from earlier cultures, but carried over, women feel like they need to sacrifice to make their children happy. And hence why I often see moms struggling to feel like they are failing at both work and childcare. Even in progressive households, this sacrifice reward story goes deep and women tend to do more, even if they are also working. Women are also set up for and expected to do the emotional labor by society too. And this isn't to say this can be easily changed. It's just more reasons why it's important to find more rewarding choices where we can. And remember, many choices feel sacrificial when it isn't our choice and thus it doesn't feel rewarding. There are many sacrifices in raising a child, like on sleep. But at least for me, I consciously chose to become a parent. And so knowing I chose this and being present with Essa all comes together to make it rewarding. Remember, creating a new story doesn't mean everything is easy. It means what we are doing is worth it. Having said that, there are other choices out there aside from sacrificing everything for your child. Another view that resonates with me today is Carl Jung said the most important thing you can do as a parent is live out your dreams so your child doesn't live them out for you. What Jung is challenging is our culture today is the sacrifice reward story for parenting. The more we put others' needs first out of obligation or as a way to not potentially disappoint people, or because we are told this is what a good parent or partner does, the more often we feel like we deserve food because of the emotional deprivation from not having our own needs and wants met. If we apply this to the accommodator worldview to our exercise example, I can't think of a better accommodator pattern that leads to I deserve this eating than doing cardio exercise, because Richard Simmons, who I grew up with, and I love Richard Simmons, or Jillian Michaels told us to, and we want to accommodate them. And we think this exercise counts more because we hate it so much. Oh my God, I think one of the most liberating things in my self-authoring story was realizing I don't really need to do as much cardio as I thought I had to do. Okay, obviously this is a personal story I had to unlearn, but our belief when it comes to the cardio story, that's more a belief than a story. But I used to do really intense cardio exercise because growing up in the 80s and 90s, that was really our only choices. Oh, and the Nordic track. Let's not forget those, or step aerobics. My dad had a Nordic track, and growing up in Pittsburgh, the weather is crappy, especially in the winter. Before things warmed up so much, we had so much more snow. So he would be down in the mornings doing the Nordic track. And that's actually doing the Nordic track and taking my pulse in my neck incorrectly was actually how I found my cancer. But when I started real life after college, all that cardio made me so tired afterwards. But I thought that's how I knew it was working, because it was such a sacrifice and the reward was so many calories I burned, even though I would then eat sugar at night because I was so exhausted and drained in part from my workout. So if you find yourself in the accommodator pattern, the question to ask yourself is, what do I need here? And then quote, indulge yourself. So to recap, we have an I deserve this reaction with food because we've been socialized into believing sacrifice reward, not necessarily in heaven, but in recognition as a good person with varying identities that we believe make us good, whether it's self-sacrificing mom, low-maintenance friend, never difficult, etc. These are ways we've been socialized to belong or have an important role with our families, friends, and communities. They are only one way of living, and we have other stories so we can choose from and still belong to those places, because we do need to belong, and yet we most fully feel we belong when we are most truly ourselves. To become self-authoring, we need to decide if we want to choose the sacrifice reward story, or if we want to choose a story where we can make the process rewarding, so we stop I deserve this eating. To start this self-authoring process, next time you make a choice that feels sacrificial, ask yourself, what would make this more rewarding? To actually follow through and help you choose something more rewarding, if you find yourself in competitor mode, you can ask yourself, what would shift in how I approach this if I chose what would replenish me? If you find yourself in avoid mode, how can I right-size my expectations of what I have to do, what's coming up, and my next step? If you find yourself in the accommodator pattern, ask yourself, what do I need here? And then quote, indulge yourself. And if you need more help in recognizing these patterns, take my quiz at alishapiro.com/comfort-eating-quiz. And if you want to do more coaching work this summer and fall on the stories we've been socialized into that cause what mainstream pop psychology calls self-sabotage and falling off track, but is really self-protection, get on my list at alishapiro.com. I'll be offering very accessible coaching workshops, and I'm really excited to experiment with this. Just got off our Freedom from COVID Cravings webinar, and it was so energizing, and I love interacting with all of you. So we're going to do more of that this summer and fall in smaller bite-sized pieces. All right. I hope you enjoyed the episode. And also, I shared on this with Instagram, so if you've already done it, thank you. But please, if you could leave a review for the show, it really helps the small business owner during this time of COVID, when obviously, many people are going through financial challenges, but having more people find the show helps my small business. And so if you haven't left a review, either on iTunes or Podbean or wherever you listen to your podcast, and you found the show helpful, I'd really, really appreciate it. It would mean a lot to me. Thank you so much, and we're out.
Thank you, Health Rebels, for tuning in today. Have a reaction, question, or want the transcript from today's episode? Find me at alishapiro.com. I'd love if you leave a review on Apple Podcast and tell your friends and family about Insatiable. It helps us grow our community and share a new way of approaching health in our bodies. Thanks for engaging in a different kind of conversation. And remember, always, your body truths are unique, profound, real, and liberating.